starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our discussion on client credits and returns in Design Manager. My name is Brad, and I'll be hosting the demonstration today. If you have questions during the webinar, feel free to enter them into the questions pane under GoToWebinar panel. If the question is outside of the scope of today's discussion, please email them to support@designmanager.com. And lastly, if you miss a portion of the webinar or want to review any of our past discussions, go to our YouTube channel at Design Manager Inc., Design Manager INC. And here you can see all sorts of topics, including our quick start videos, helpful tutorials, and more comprehensive webinars, which we categorize into our project management and accounting courses. Okay. Now, as I stated, today we'll be discussing various ways to record credits, returns, and reallocation funds to our clients. When handling client returns and credits, the first and most important step is to fully grasp what your client's expectation of the return is going to be and what exactly you're intending to do. Independent of Design Manager, what is the client's desire? Do they want a check back? Do they want a credit on account? Do they want funds moved between proposals and invoices, etc.? Having this clear notion of what you're trying to accomplish is critical in properly implementing transactions in Design Manager and really will be necessary if you contact our technical support staff. In today's discussion, we'll be manually executing several credit transactions, but we'll be heavily utilizing the returns and credits window, which can be used to handle the vast majority of such processes with great ease and accuracy. And that's located under your accounting tab, in your accounts receivable frame, and there's our returns and credits button and our client returns and credits window, which we'll be seeing again shortly. Today we'll be focusing only on client returns. For information regarding vendor returns and refunds, see our webinar, Advanced Accounting for Vendor Returns and Credits, again on our YouTube channel at Design Manager Inc., and you can have all that information on the vendor side of things as well. Okay, let's begin with some common scenarios of reallocating or returning funds to the client, beginning with retainers. If you have questions on recording a retainer or deposit on a proposal, which will be discussed next, please review our Accounting Course 1, Client Deposits and Retainers, where I go into great discussions on both of those types of transactions as well. This will be focusing solely on returning or reallocating those particular transactions. Okay. Retainers are funds received from the client to allow you to begin purchasing goods and services. They can essentially be considered a good faith receipt between your company and the client, really to ensure that payment for finished design services will occur, or simply as funds for design services themselves. We routinely receive questions on applying, reallocating, or refunding retainers, particularly at the end of the project. So let's highlight some of those scenarios. One of the most common and convenient ways to utilize the client's retainer at the end of the project would be to apply it while creating the final client invoice. Let's go through that scenario. Let's jump to our project tab and we'll go to our projects window. We'll go down to our Carter's Brigantine Beach home project, and I'm going to use the project status window, another window that we'll be referring to multiple times in this discussion because it allows us to see quite a bit of information about our retainers, deposits, invoices, credits, etc. So right in the project status window on the summary tab, under our client deposit retainer frame, we can see that we've received $4,000 of retainer, we've received $13,213 and change of deposits. We've applied $2,980 of that, and we have over $14,000 available of those funds. For more detail, we jump over to our deposits and retainers tab itself, and I can see all of my open or available funds. So I have my open retainer of $4,000, and I have open or unapplied deposits of $10,233 and change. So we have lots of money available to us. Now, let's imagine that we're nearing the end of the project for the Carters, and they're asking us to apply some of that retainer to one of their final invoices. Very easy to do so. So I'm going to minimize my project window, go over to our accounting tab. I'm going to jump on our client invoices window off of our accounts receivable frame. And to create a new invoice, as I'm sure many of you know, we simply click the Add Invoice button in the bottom left corner. Let's put in our Carter project. And we can see all of our available items. Very conveniently listed for us right along the bottom totals is our available retainer, matching precisely what we saw on our project status window as well. So let's imagine that, again, we're nearing the end of this project and we're going to apply some of this retainer to an invoice for some of our items. Let's imagine that we're going to invoice the bed, fabric, and the table. So I'm going to put that in as my transaction description. As many of you know, transaction descriptions are extremely convenient and helpful tools to review information that you may have entered in months or even years prior. Bed, fabric, and table, and I'm going to go ahead and select items 4, 8, and 9. Now notice, as I did so, all of my totals are increasing the price, sales tax, and even the deposit applied to those items. And notice, I can't click or change any of those values. They're fixed for me. What I can change, however, is the retainer amount. So I can input the amount of this available retainer that I so desire. Now, Design Manager is not going to allow you to make mistakes whenever at all possible. So if I try to use more retainer than my available amount, let's say I input 4,200, Design Manager is going to, of course, alert me to that fact and warn me thereof. But let's imagine that the Carters are expecting us to use enough of the retainer to pay the invoice in full. In other words, $2233.77. So I'll go ahead and type that directly into my retainer box, and my balance due decreases down to 0, as you would imagine. If we click OK, that puts our invoice on our client invoice posting list, and we can go ahead and print and post. On the modern version of the invoice itself, we can see our items selected for us, of course. Let's focus on the total region, the deposit that was allocated to each of the items, and our retainer are both showing conveniently as a single value in our less deposit amount on the totals region of the document. And our balance due is 0 as the client's desire. Everything looks good to me, so I would go ahead and close and accept. Very simple. Now, let's see what kind of transpired behind the scenes there. Well, first, on the existing tab of our client invoice window, we of course see our brand new invoice, the total sales, sales tax. That's our combination of our retainer and our deposit being applied, net invoice, balance due, etc., all being 0. In other words, we invoice the goods and the invoice is closed based upon the use of both deposit and our retainer on that invoice. Back on our project status window, we can now see, well, my retainers received is indeed still 4,000. I didn't remove or reallocate any of that. I just applied it. So my deposit retainer applied certainly increased, which is both available on the client deposit retainer frame and correspondingly on the client invoice frame as well. Over on our deposit and retainers grid, we can also see our brand new invoice and the application of both our retainer and our deposits, and our open retainer and open deposit have reduced as well. In fact, we can also see that on our invoices grid. If I uncheck show open only, there's our brand new invoice, and we can see the same, the application of our deposit. So all of that information flows seamlessly throughout the entire program. Now, let's imagine if at a later date, the Carters say it's going to be we want those goods or we don't want those goods and want to return them, and I need to credit or reverse the invoice, Design Manager will automatically restore both the retainer and the applied deposit for future use. Let's take a look at that. Back on our accounting tab, I'm going to jump back to our client invoice window. Now that the invoice is already created, we're going to view it and do any manipulation on the existing tab. And if I want to reverse this invoice in full, I simply highlight it on my existing client invoice grid and click the credit button. Doing so brings up our reverse credit invoice number, the invoice that I'm actually reversing. I'm going to use the fiscal month and today's date is just fine for me. We will skip printing just to keep ourselves on schedule here, but I'm certainly going to put a transaction description in here. How about maybe the carders really didn't want us to use that retainer or change their mind. Let's say do not apply retainer. Go ahead and click OK. And I'm going to skip the printing stage. I can always reprint it in the future if desired, but I'll go ahead and process that credit, and lo and behold, notice we can see our original invoice and then a brand new credit memo invoice of $10,012, which is an exact reversal. We reduce our sale, we reduce our sales tax, we make our deposit and retainer available again, and we can see all the rest of our information, transaction description. I can see that this is a reversal of the invoice beneath it, and I can see the original invoice has been reversed here as well. So there's a lot of hidden information on our client invoice existing tab as well. So what did that do to our available deposit retainer, etc.? Back to our trustee status window, we can see we're really back to our original state. We still have, of course, the original amount of retainer received and deposit received are applied, has returned back down to 2980. Again, seeing that on both of our deposit retainer and client invoices frames. On our deposit retainer grid, we can see the application of that going back into our open retainer and our open deposit along our totals. And on our invoices tab, we can see the credit here as well, again indicating that those funds are now available for us again. So just like that, Design Manager is always trying to manually or automatically for you return the deposit and retainer as necessary. Okay, great demonstration there. Now, let's do another. Let's imagine that all of the items in the project or a particular phase of the project have been invoiced in full, but not yet paid in full. So I might want to transfer or reallocate a retainer to a payment on a client invoice or invoices that have an outstanding balance. Let's keep our Carter's Beach Home project, since we just bought all of those funds back, as our example. Now, let's imagine that if we go back to our client invoices, existing tab, we can see invoice 10,006 for the Carter's Brigantine Beach Home currently has a balance due of $1168.75. And the Carters are asking us, well, we have all this available retainer. Rather than sending another check, can you apply some of that retainer to that existing invoice? Absolutely. We often call that reallocating funds in Design Manager terminology. Whenever you're doing so, the methodology is the exact same. You could be transferring a retainer to a deposit to a payment on invoice, it doesn't matter. The reallocation of funds through those documents are all done by going to your accounting tab and your cash receipt window. On the cash receipt window, we're going to click add as if we got more funds from our client, but we actually did not. So I'm going to go ahead and select our Carter's Brigantine Beach Home, and we'll go through the steps of doing precisely that. So we can see here is our retainer line. We've received 4,000 of that retainer, and we have that amount available, which again agrees with our project status window, etc. And the Carters are asking us to take a portion of that to pay off the remaining balance on our sleigh bed invoice. Absolutely no problem, and very easy to do so. In this case, the amount is going to be zero. We're actually not getting any funds from the Carter. They provide us those funds already. We're simply reallocating or changing how they're being applied or recorded in Design Manager. We'll use today's date. That's just fine for us. Payment type, I'm going to select cash only because I don't need to process through undeposited funds or any of the additional accounting functionality. Check number, well, there isn't really a check number, but I'm going to use that as another indication or another area to communicate. And I might say from retainer. Now, with the retainer, we always have to indicate how much we're receiving or how much we're moving. So on our client deposit retainer grid, I'm going to have my retainer highlighted and click the edit button as indicated by the pencil. In the case of moving a fund, we're going to indicate that reduction by inputting the amount as a negative value. In this case, we want to move 1168.75 to invoice 10,006. No problem. I'm going to input a minus 1168.75. And again, my transaction description, how about I say pay invoice 10,006. By clicking OK, Design Manager automatically selects that retainer for us so we can see that being entered as a negative value in our total region. Since I'm going to pay the exact amount to an existing invoice, I'm going to go down to our payment on invoices grid. I could just tag it, but I will input another transaction description, just because I like to make a perfect log for myself, where I would say from retainer and click OK. And when I do so, again, Design Manager selects that invoice for us. So we have a reduction in our retainer balanced by an increase in our payments on invoices. So our total receipt is zero, which again makes sense. We're not actually receiving funds. We're just reallocating. The difference is zero for my amount, so we're perfect. I'm going to go ahead and click OK. And now on our cash receipt posting list, we can see one entry that has two distributions, our negative retainer. In other words, we're moving those funds to the payment on invoice. If we go ahead and post, we're all set. Now, what happened here? Let's jump to the existing tab of our cash receipt window. And we can see there's our receipt. Amount is zero. That has our two single distributions. So we really have that perfect audit trail of what happened. We put a negative retainer in or remove some of that retainer to pay off an existing invoice. Back on our project status. In this case, my retainer received does actually reduce. It's almost as if we've said, well, that wasn't received as a retainer anymore. It was received as a payment on invoice. So of course, correspondingly, the available amount would go down. On our deposit retainer grid, we can see our negative retainer paying off our invoice, again, bringing down our open retainer as one would expect. And on our invoices tab, we can see our invoiced 10,006 now has our payment on it. And our check number says from retainer, again, more indication of what transpired, so I know exactly what happened. From here, I'm going to use my Go-To button, which is a convenient way to jump right to my client invoice existing tab, where I then may decide to reprint the invoice in question using the Show Payments option. And here's our original invoice. And what we can see is that we have our invoice now being shown as being paid in full. In other words, we have a way to provide documentation to the carders that transpired as they desired. Just like that. Okay. Lastly, in the instance that the client wants the retainer returned as it was not fully used, or perhaps the scope of the project changed, we can use our returns and credits window to easily generate a refund. Let's imagine that the carders simply want to check back for the remaining retainer on their Pennington home project. Again, remember, having that clear vision of what the client's expectations are for the refund or the credit is the key to this whole process. The clients want to check back for a retainer, no problem, I can execute that easily. So if we look at our status for our Carter's Pennington home in this case, We can see we've received 7,500 total of retainer, and all of that appears to be available as well. And that corresponds with the 2 retainers that we received on our deposit retainer grid as well. And let's imagine that they want the second retainer refunded for whatever reason as a check. Again, perhaps the scope of the project changed or what have you. Very easy and a very convenient way to use our returns and credits window. So we'll hop back to our accounting tab and we'll click our returns and credits button in our accounts receivable frame. Again, bringing us back to our client returns and credits window that we saw at the beginning of the discussion. So we're going to put in the project for which we want to generate our refund, and that was the Carter's Pennington home. Refund for, well, we're not refunding a particular deposit or payment on item or items, which we'll do shortly. We're going to refund the retainer. And upon clicking that selection, notice how the window radically changes itself. Refund type, we have several selections. Write check to client, that's going to be our option. We also have on client credit card. So if they want the amount returned on their Visa, Amex, etc., and you have those capabilities at your firm, you could absolutely use that selection. And then we have 2 more. Increase client's retainer. Well, I'm already refunding a retainer. So if I try to increase the client's retainer, Design Manager is going to alert me. That's sort of a nonsensical way of handling the refund. So we're going to prevent you from progressing. In the case of a retainer, however, the idea of on account or as an open AR or credit accounts receivable balance also doesn't make sense for a retainer. You can't create a credit invoice for a retainer. So the selections we have available for us are to write a check or to refund on the client's credit card. But as the Carter's decree, we're going to write a check for them. The available retainer, again, is conveniently listed for us there. And we said we're going to refund the second retainer, which was 2,500, and we're all set. Design Manager also has a little note here. You always want to enter your refund amounts as positive values. Let us handle all the negatives and credits or those types of things. You just enter an amount itself, and we'll handle it from there. We can use today's date. That's just fine for us. The fiscal month of 4/19 is fine as well. Transaction description, we default that to credit memo, but you could change it as necessary. I might put something in there as a refund second retainer. When I input my refund amount, my total refund in the bottom right corner in red updates correspondingly as well. And now I'm all set. I simply need to click OK to process the refund. Design Manager alerts us that it's ready to process the return and credit and the desired fiscal period for your review. By clicking OK, we're going to process. And just like that, we're finished. Design Manager says the refund credit has been completed successfully. Would you like to go see the entry in your accounts payable so that you can write a check to the Carters? By clicking yes, we close the returns and credits window for you, bring up your payments and print checks window, positioned right to the entry where we could go ahead and actually create a check for the Carters. Now, fantastic, we're ready to go. But what happened in some of the other deeper accounting notions here? I'm going to use my Go To button off of my payments and print checks window, which then jumps me to the existing tab of my vendor deposit invoices and operating expense window. And we can see we created an expense for the Carters using the specialized vendor code, which we call a one-time vendor. And using the detail button, we can see that I'm generating that expense off of a specialized account called the suspense account. Take note of that, as we'll see it again momentarily, 39,000 suspense. Further, if we go to our cash receipt window, existing tab, I see 2 entries. One, I see a negative retainer. Makes total sense. We're refunding that retainer, so we're indicating that refund as a negative. But that reduces my cash. I still need to write a check for the client, so I need some way of maintaining my cash balance at this point. We handle that in the deeper end of the accounting pool by entering in a miscellaneous cash receipt for you as a positive 2,500, keeping our cash aligned. And lo and behold, we're using that 39,000 suspense account to do so as well. So we're using that suspense account to handle the refund for you and do all of the perfectly audited transactions as well. Back on our project status window, we can see our retainers received has now reduced along with the available amount, as we would imagine, and we have the corresponding reduction or refund of that second retainer listed on the deposit and retainers grid as well. Okay, retainers. Now, let's move on to a similar concept of deposits. Unlike retainers, deposits are tied intricately to the items contained on the proposal to which the deposit is applied. But in accounting concepts, really, the two transactions are nearly identical. However, deposits have a few additional mechanisms to change how they are allocated to the proposal items, and we often have questions on how to do so. So let's run through some of those scenarios next. If a deposit has been applied to a proposal and the client rejects an item at a later date, you can simply edit the proposal, remove the item or items, and Design Manager is going to redistribute that existing deposit, provided, however, that the item has not yet been invoiced, a scenario which we'll address shortly. So let's walk through the concept of having a deposit applied to a proposal and removing some of the items on that proposal. So let's jump to our project tab and we'll go to our proposals window. Let's focus on the Hilson project for this example. And we have a singular proposal for their home office. I'm going to use the proposal status tab, proposal status window a few times now by clicking the status button. And immediately I can see that none of these items have been invoiced. They don't fall into the caveat that I just described. How do I know so? Well, first, I don't see any values in the invoice total, but even more visually, any item displayed in red are not invoiced to the client at this point. So I can come right to my proposal status window and discern that. So this is a perfect example to see how the redistribution of of a deposit on a proposal is going to work. We even show the amount of each of items and the requested values. Notice that our deposit received is a bit higher than the requested amount, and we can see that we requested a total of $1189.41, but the clients gave us a check of an even $1,200. So it was a little bit more received on each item. Now in our scenario, let's imagine that the Hilsons are not going to go ahead with the bookshelf, and they want the $262.82 simply applied to the other items. Very common and very simple. All we have to do now is simply edit the proposal, name or phase home office. I might change this to perhaps revision 1 for my bookkeeping. And I simply need to come down to our bookshelf, untag, and regenerate the proposal by clicking OK. And now we can see just the credenza and hutch, the computer desk. Our totals are on the next page. And we'll close and accept those changes. Notice the requested deposit amount went down. It sure did, because we removed an item, so that value is going to decrease. But the received amount certainly does not. We still got $1,200. We're just changing how it's being applied. If we look at our status now, obviously our bookshelf's not going to be included on this status window, and we can see that the deposit received for each of the items has now increased. In fact, it actually increased proportionately to the requested deposit amount. So the credenza and hutch have a higher requested deposit amount, so they received more of that $262 and change, as did the computer desk. And now I may choose to actually reprint our proposal. I'm going to select the option to show actual deposits. And in this format, we can see the two remaining items, but in the totals region, I can see the proposal amount, the application of that deposit, and the estimated future due of $658.88, basically providing a de facto statement on what we imagine the final bill for those pieces will be. Okay, now I did make several statements about not being able to edit or remove an item from a proposal if it's already been invoiced to the client. The theory here is we've received a deposit for the item. We've applied that deposit on the fiscal document of the client invoice, so I can't take it off the proposal and lose that deposit amount. Design Manager will actually prevent you from doing so. I have an example as such in one of our Carter's projects. Let's go down to the wine cellar. I can right away see that the status of item is mixed, and one of the items has been invoiced while the sconces have not. So if I try to remove item 15 from this proposal, as we just did on the Hilson example, by editing and untagging, Design Manager is going to block me by saying it cannot be removed from the proposal since it has been included on the client invoice, basically preventing me from causing damage to my allocation of deposits. This would have to be handled differently. In fact, one of the standing points of this discussion in general is that if an item has been invoiced, the credit or return is going to include some form of a credit invoice, and we'll see that shortly. Basically, if it's been invoiced, we're going to use a different mechanism than taking it off the proposal to refund that amount. Okay. Like the retainer, we can manually move a deposit from a proposal to another retainer, or another proposal, or even a payment on an invoice, and the procedure is the exact same. As I said before, the reallocation of funds is done the exact same manner, no matter how we're moving those monies around. So if we take a look at, let's go back to that Carter's Beach Home project. Let's take a look at proposal 4 for phase 1 of the bedroom. We've requested and received $5379.50. And let's imagine that that's being replaced or superseded by phase 2. And they simply want to take those funds and use them elsewhere. Well, we can absolutely do that. Maybe we have an outstanding invoice that we want to apply that value to. Let's go ahead and walk through that scenario. So back to our accounting and cash receipts, just like we did for our retainer examples, we're going to add, and we're going to put in the project in question. Now, I don't see proposal 4 listed on my client deposit retainer grid. Why? Well, we've actually received the amount that we expected to, or more than the requested amount, in fact. So Design Manager always tries to keep its lists and grids as tidy and as manageable as possible. So I need to click the Show All option, and then I can see proposal 4. Again, we're going to suppress any proposal that has received an amount equal to or greater than the requested amount. Now I want to move this $5379.50 and apply it to outstanding invoice 10,005, just like we did with our retainer example. So our amount will be 0. We'll use cash again as our payment type. We can say X for deposit. And to indicate the removal or reallocation of those funds, I'm going to highlight the proposal, click the edit button, and input the desired deposit amount as a negative value. I'm going to change our transaction description, and we'll say canceled, move to payment, and click OK. We've already selected it, and we can see our negative deposit being shown in the total region. In this case, my applied deposit is still not going to pay off the balance due of the invoice in full. So I need to edit my payment as well and make it match the $5379.50. I'll change my transaction description here as well from prop 0004, and I'm automatically tagged. And just like with our retainer example, we have a negative deposit offset with a positive payment on the invoice for a total receipt of 0. Once again, not receiving any funds, just reallocating funds that we already have as per our client's decision. Click OK. We have our two pieces, our two distributions of our cash receipt. Net effect on cash, of course, is 0, and we go ahead and post. Back on our existing tab, we have that perfect audit log. We have those offsetting transactions with all of my descriptions indicating exactly what was going on so I could review them with the client if necessary over time. On our client invoice window, if we go down to invoice 10,005, we can see our original net amount, and here's our payment being applied. And there's still a residual balance due of $269.50. I would generally, at this point, reprint the invoice using the showing payments options here as well. Let's go to the last page, and we can see clearly listed, we've transferred the deposit on today's date as a payment on that outstanding invoice, and now the balance due for invoice 10,005 has reduced all the way down to $269.50, and send this off to the client for payment and for their records as well. Lastly, if we go back to the proposal window, we can see our requested amount remains, total proposed remains, but our received deposit is showing as 0, and yet I can see my last check number and date indicating that I transferred that deposit. That immediately indicates to me that there was accounting activity associated with this document at some point. And if they truly canceled the proposal in full, I may at this stage decide to go ahead and mark it as completed. Yes. All set. So those, now I've completed my proposal and the items as well. Lastly, just like our retainer, we can use the returns and credits window to easily generate a refund to the client. So let's jump back to the Hilsons. So we've already taken off the bookshelf from our original home office, and now let's imagine that we're going to refund another piece of this proposal. We can use our returns and credits window to do just that. As we already saw, the remaining two items, the hutch and the computer desk, have not been invoiced, and let's imagine that we're going to refund the deposit of the hutch as our example. Very simple. Let's jump back to our accounting, returns and credits. Getting very familiar now, we'll put in the Hilson project. Refund type. Let's imagine that we're going to put this on their Visa card, for example. In this case, now we are indeed refunding an item or items deposits. So we're going to leave that selection. I may choose to use the proposal number filter to narrow down my list of items. So here's our proposal 1, and if I input or select it from the search, now I'm only focusing on those items on proposal 1. Very convenient if your project is voluminous and has hundreds or even more items. The filter can work out very nicely for you. From here, I can see the amount to refund on both of our items. So I can simply tag or select the item that I want to refund, and Design Manager will start the calculations for us in the total refund amount. So if I select them both, of course, I would go to that $1,200 that we saw originally received on the proposal. But in our scenario, we're only going to be refunding the deposit for the hutch. Further, I could even change the amount, and let's imagine that we want to keep $55.25 for freight or what have you. I could change the amount to refund as well down to 700. And we even tell you or alert you to the fact that you're overriding or changing the calculated amount as well. But we'll go ahead and refund the entire amount. I have today's date just fine with me, same with the fiscal month. Transaction description, may change that again. How about refund touch deposit? And just like that, I'm ready to process. If I go ahead and click OK, Design Manager, of course, is going to alert me that it's going to process the refund and into which fiscal period. Click OK to acknowledge. I selected that I'm going to refund on a credit card, so I want to select the appropriate payment type, so the appropriate account is affected as well, and click OK. Design Manager tells me that the refund is completed successfully, and it's going to say, do I wish to review the entry that was created based upon the refund? And that actually comes in as a cash receipt of a negative $755.25, basically taking those funds out. Now I'm inputting that, and if we look on our checkbook window, we can see a payment or a reduction to our cash balance. And presumably the credit card processor for our Visa card is going to be refunding those funds to the Hilsons as imagined, and our bank account would also be reduced as well. And that's all the transactions that would occur in this particular scenario. Very simple. Okay, lastly, let's talk about invoicing. Today's rule of thumb: if the item has been invoiced, you're going to be creating or processing some form of a credit invoice during the process. Whether or not the item has been paid in full, if it's received a deposit or not, etc. All of which must be considered, but it really also depends on what the client is expecting. So let's go through a few scenarios here. Let's imagine that we've created an invoice with a multitude of items upon them. The client receives the invoice, has yet to pay, and rejects an item for whatever reason. Well, very simple scenario. In this case, we can just credit the invoice in its entirety and choose not to invoice the offending item. So let's take a look at an invoice in that state. Let's go to invoice 10,001 for the carders. We can see just under $20,000, net invoice of 10,900, but not yet paid in full. So the carders received it, and let's say that they reject the bid for whatever reason. And we can reprint that. So we want to regenerate the invoice without the California King bed. Fantastic. So I'm going to use our credit function again. Today, this current fiscal month is fine, along with the date, transaction description, canceled bed. We won't skip printing in here so we can examine how the document will appear. Now we can see the invoice is actually generated as a credit memo, and it even says that for you automatically. And all of the prices of each item are being fully reversed, along with any freight, sales tax, and the reapplication of the deposit, as we saw in our example some time ago. Accept, and now the invoice is fully reversed. So now we can go and generate it again simply without the rejected King bed. So we'll go to our new tab and we'll add the invoice. Let's say transaction description revised, master bedroom. And we'll just go ahead and select each item except for the King bed itself. Click OK. And we can print and post. Just like that. Very simple. And now we've successfully done exactly what the carders have asked of us. Okay, that's a very simple example. How about a bit more challenging? let's imagine that we have a return or a credit for a single item on a paid invoice. The client's paid for the item and we owe them some form of compensation. The returns and credits window is perfect in this scenario. So let's imagine invoice 10,010 for the Hilsons here. We can see that the invoice was created and subsequently paid in full for the master bedroom. And we can reprint that. We can see there's the 3 pieces that we have. Everything is paid in full, but they are going to be returning, let's say, the side table. We need to process some sort of refund for them. So in this case, we're going to use the returns and credits window, as it makes this somewhat complicated theoretical process very easy to handle in a practical sense. So we're going to put in the Hilsons. Let's imagine that the project's still ongoing, and in this case, they actually want to maintain the credit on account. So we'll use that example. On account. It is going to be for a particular item versus a retainer. And I can even use the invoice number filter here as well. And if I use my search, I'm only going to see invoices for that particular project. And there we go. Now we can see our 3 pieces have been shown for us, all available for our return. But we are only returning or refunding the side table. So we're going to go ahead and select our tag. And as we saw before, the total refund changes. In this case, actually, perhaps we won't refund the freight. So we can use our edit button, select the override, and we'll take the freight amount out of the price to invoice and taxable amounts. And now, rather than $1,020, we can see we're down to 910, and that we are in fact in overriding return mode. We'll use today's date again, fiscal month just fine, transaction description, refund side table. Go ahead and click OK. And this is all becoming quite familiar now. We're going to be alerted and warned that we're going to head and process the refund. Click OK, and we're done just like that. And now Design Manager's asking, we've created a credit invoice. Would you like to go ahead and be positioned there so you could reprint it? Sure. So that jumps us to our Client Invoice Existing tab. And here indeed is a negative or credit invoice. So if we reprint, no need to show payments in this case. We can see the invoice, credit memo again, just for our side table, and that negative, that minus $910 is reducing what the client owes us in the future. It's basically a credit on account that they can use in conjunction with other items that will be invoiced in the future. So we're maintaining that credit for them through the duration of the project lifecycle. Finally, another scenario that comes up into our technical support team from time to time is, what if the client wants, or what if you want to provide a refund on a portion of an overall invoice, or perhaps you want to refund X amount of design time, or even give them a credit for services, freight, design time, reimbursables, etc. A very easy way to handle that is to create a credit item for that amount. What do I mean by that? Well, now let's go to our project tab and project specifications, and let's pull up one of the Carter's projects. How about their Brigantine Beach home? And let's imagine they have 2 projects ongoing with us, clearly a very good client. We may want to give them a reduction or a credit for design services for being such a fantastic client. I can hold or use that, that value very easily by adding or creating an item and using the item window a bit creatively. For the client description, I might type something in along the lines of credit for, oh, I don't know, 2 hours of design service, or whatever verbiage you may like. I'll put that under time. I'll do minus 2 hours. I'll put this under professional services. And on my component window, let's say that I charge, oh, I don't know, $100 an hour, make it our math easy. I could go ahead and put in 100. I'm not going to mark that up. So I'm going to calculate a minus $200 of, let's say, design fee. Click OK, and I have this credit item. And if I click OK, as time goes on, I can use this item in conjunction with items that I'm going to actually invoice. So back on our accounting client invoices window, let's go ahead and add one for the Carters. I can select my credit for 2 hours of design service, along with some travel time and some AutoCAD time as well. And notice that the total invoice price is being reduced appropriately, as we would imagine. And I can actually do that with any items as well. And by printing, we can see that our credit for design services is actually reducing that overall amount. We're just using an item to reduce the revenue from the project in a manual sense. Very quick, clean, and precise way of handling sort of unspecified credit amounts like that. And there we go. And with that, that brings us to the end of our somewhat lengthy discussion on client credits and returns. And quite honestly, they're a complicated yet integral part of the design business. So I wanted to go through handling many common scenarios today, such as to show how we can both manually reflect the return and then also repeatedly using the returns and credits window, which can easily process the most common returns. I thank you all for joining the discussion today, and I hope that you attend another of our free webinars in the near future. Take care and have a great day.